Hey y'all, welcome to the Team LoCoFit Roundtable, hosted by me, Laurin Conlon, owner of Team LoCoFit. Each week, I am joined by one of our coaches to dive headfirst into the nutrition, training, mindset, and coaching strategies we use with our clients. If you loved the show, please subscribe, leave us a review, tell a friend, you know the drill. And for more information about coaching, the programs we offer, and additional content, visit teamlocofit.com. All right, y'all, I am joined by Blonde this week, aka Laurin. I feel like you're blonde and then Laurin.
I am.
It just is what it is. And people have really caught on. And I feel like even the tags are like, people just know that you're blonde. So we're just keeping it that way. So I'm with Blonde this week. And we actually have a really, exciting podcast. We think it's exciting. But we get a lot of questions about NEAT, non-exercise activity induced thermogenesis. So basically, if you're watching the video, anytime I'm moving my hands, anytime I'm active, and it's not something that is exercise related, that is considered NEAT. And there's a lot of considerations here. It's actually really, really interesting research in this area too. One of my favorite studies, actually, not favorite, but it's interesting. One of my most interesting finding studies was that they overfed groups of people, and basically there was people who compensated with more NEAT, and then there was people who didn't compensate. And obviously the people who compensated with higher NEAT levels didn't really gain as much weight. And then the other people gained a lot of weight. And so it was really interesting to see this kind of spectrum of, how much of this is influenced genetically and how much of this can we control. So, there's some people who are always going to hey, we feed them more, then they're just really active and they're pumped up and they're energized and moving around. And then other people, you feed them more and they're just yeah, my life feels the same. So it's going to be partly a genetic thing. And then also if you were just aware of it, we can change it. So what is NEAT? I know we just said that kind of, but anything that's movement related that is not training related.
Yes. Yeah. So a couple things with NEAT. I think I'm going to go ahead and just kick this off with, say the competitor. What did you?
Okay, I was trying to kick it off.
Oh. If anyone is watching this video, I'm sorry. Anyway.
Laurin loves my analogies. I'm just going to say, you just love when I do this.
Oh man. Yes, they kill me. Okay. So anyways, for the competitor, NEAT becomes very, very important, especially as we start to diet down further and further, because of the fact that oftentimes as calories start to dwindle and you start to get closer to that poverty level, a lot of times things that you don't even realize that count as NEAT come to an end because you are depleted, you're hungry, you're lethargic. So what I mean by that is fidgeting. You probably don't fidget as much throughout the day. You're kind of just sitting and being. You don't really want to move as much. So if something is downstairs and you may have run down to get it before, you might not now. And then trying to think about in general, we just see that NEAT kind of drops off with people that are in a severe caloric deficit, especially for a long period of time as a competition prep. So it's not that it's wrong, it's normal, but it is something that we need to kind of monitor because while most of the time it's not going to impact the person too much, if your NEAT falls off drastically, that is expenditure that we're losing and calories that we're no longer burning. So there does need to be some sort of communication with the coach as far as movement throughout the day. And I know one time I was on prep with Laurin, and even I was going to be ending my semester. And when I was on campus, I was walking 14,000 steps a day with a backpack. And so I let her know when that was over and hey, look, I'm not going to be doing this anymore. I'm not going to be carrying all this weight on my back. And I'm probably going to be around 10,000 steps a day, just so you're aware. It didn't impact me greatly, but it is good to kind of let your coach know. And whether that be something like my experience, or you're just feeling extra lethargic.
And certain metabolisms are going to handle it differently. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So some people really have to stay on top of every single detail, whether they're a competitor or not. If they're just trying to lose body fat, some people have a lot harder of a time, and you really have to stay on top of all those things. So 10,000 versus 14,000 could be a lot to them. And then somebody else, it might not really affect them that much because they make it up in some other way. And they're just active. So yeah, when you are dieting, So if you look at like metabolism in general, the biggest component of your metabolism is going to be your resting metabolic rate, your RMR.
Yeah.
And then the smaller components are going to be TEF, so thermic effect of food, and then EAT, exercise activity thermogenesis. So even if you are training, you know what I mean, you're probably not going to change those very much. The biggest variable with your metabolism is NEAT, and typically it makes up at least 15%. Some people say a little bit more, but it kind of just depends, you know, on everything else. But in general, that is going to take the biggest hit, and have the most fluctuations. Because say like, you know, hey, I train 4 days a week, or I train 5 days a week. That's kind of set, right? You know, your resting metabolic rate when you're dieting is going to go down. That is normal. It's not a huge amount, but it is a normal suppression, as well as TEF is going to go down. So your thermic effect of food is going to go down because you're eating less food. Again, makes sense. Your EAT, your training is likely going to stay similar, you know, and you might be increasing the output there as far as like time spent training or time spent doing cardio. So that's going to kind of be variable. But the real big one that's going to change a lot is your NEAT. And we see so much of that. And like you said, yourself, I mean, myself, it's honestly alarming, like how sloth mode you get. And even for somebody who is super fidgety like myself,
Yeah.
I even, you know, notice it greatly. So for example, like let's say I am like on a podcast, right? Or I'm presenting somewhere, like that's going to be a lot of energy if I'm dieting, and I'm still going to go, you know, all out, right? But then I'm going to be really sedentary for a few hours afterwards, right? Like I'm not going to be like recovered from that really quickly. Versus now, if I was to give a presentation, you know, okay, hey, I'm walking around, moving, doing all this stuff. And then, you know, okay, oh, I'm a little bit drained from giving that talk, but then I like recover in half an hour. You know what I mean? Like it's not that big of a deal. So your body is trying to fight you in any scenario, essentially, to slow everything down, because it's like, hey, why are we trying to diet? We don't want to do that. So it's just a normal response, which is slowing the NEAT down. And like you said, like going, like if there's something that's like upstairs, you're like, normally it's like, oh, let me just go grab that. And then when you're like really deep into a diet, you're like, I can wait till like later, right?
I could probably do that tomorrow, I guess.
Yeah, I don't even need to go upstairs. I can just sleep down here, right? Like that's the thing. I can sleep on the couch.
If you had, like, I think any competitor will relate to this. If you have not, and this sounds dramatic, it is not. Like, this is legit. There was to a point where like I would have to go up my stairs to get to my bed, and I was like holding onto the rail, like slowly crawling, like, you're gonna get there, girl. Keep moving.
Yeah,
It's so fucking
tough.
bad.
It really is
Hard
sad.
out there.
It really is sad. And that's why, like, you know, when we talk about people taking off seasons,
Mm-hmm.
it's because you know, contest prep is hard. And I did 2 consults last week, or I guess this week, because it's still Sunday, whatever day it is, whatever year it is. It's actually May. Oh my God. Quarantine day 779. But so this week, last week, whatever it was, I had 2 consults, and it was very similar. So both different, but similar idea. Like neither girl had really committed for a little while to revert. Like basically they need to either commit to fully dieting or fully reversing, right? And this is really, really common because people will kind of cut their calories, not like low, but not too low. So they're not like satiated, but they're not like in a like hit that dieting threshold yet. And then they kind of have like some snacks, like get them out of it. So they always feel like they're in these dieting adaptations, but they never really make any progress. And that's where it's like, hey, like, that's why we always say, like, you really need to commit to an off season period. Because then when you commit to a diet period, like it's game on. And that's what we're talking about here. Like, it's not something that's easy. Like if you're trying to get to super, anything that's lower than a body fat settling point or a threshold for you, which I know we've done a podcast on that, it's going to be a lot of work. So you have to be mentally, physically, metabolically prepared for that, which is why we're so pro taking a long time off. And then, because when somebody's like, yeah, I could barely get up the stairs last night, like, yeah, sounds like you're gonna hit a new low this week. like it literally sucks, but that is just the reality of physique competitions. Again, lifestyle is a little bit different.
Yeah. So I was going to now kind of like shift us into the other direction of just like lifestyle, client, general population person, because I have gotten this question, especially since the start of quarantine, like, what do I do about cardio? Like maybe you don't have access to a treadmill anymore. You don't have access to the normal cardio equipment. So typically at LoCoFit, we will prescribe a certain amount of cardio per week. That could either be steady state or HIIT, and you can kind of split it up however you want given our recommendations. So when you remove that equipment, people are kind of wondering like, how do I get this activity in? And while some of that does count as cardio, not necessarily NEAT, just because you are out of a gym, it's important that we still keep activity level around where it was before, so you're not just sitting all day. So we like to prescribe to people about 8 to 12,000 steps a day, give or take, depending on the person, like where they're starting at, kind of like what their job is like and things of that nature, just to make it realistic. So that's kind of our starting point for people. And we were talking before this podcast of the issue that comes when people try to go over that 12,000. So you can pretty much hit, I mean, there are some days where I have to try to hit 10,000 just if I'm sitting a lot or whatever work kind of throws at me. But there are other days where it's very easy for me to get 10,000 steps. But to get over 12,000, typically for most people, unless you were like a nurse on your feet all day, is pretty much like you have to try to do that. And we see that kind of ends up being like an obsessive thing where maybe you get 13,000 steps one day, you're like, oh, 13,000, that's better than 12,000. I'm going to get 14,000 tomorrow. And then you have to like 20,000 steps and you can't maintain that. So the problem is, as with any cardio prescription, even though we're just talking NEAT now, that kind of becomes your baseline. So when shit opens back up and you're trying to make progress, that's going to be like your standard NEAT now is 20,000 steps a day, and you're not going to be able to hold on to that. So
yeah. And obviously there's been a lot of recommendations like, hey, 10,000 steps a day. And I think that is a pretty sound recommendation, right? Like again, if you have less one day or you have more one day, that's not the point. No. But if you hit 10,000 steps, that means that you've probably like been on a walk or two, like, short kind of walks. You've done some stuff around the house, you've been active, but you haven't been like overly pushing yourself. Right. And I do see, I've had clients in the past who've really, really struggled with the high NEAT with the tracking, because the tracking becomes like this obsessive thing. Yeah. And it's just like anything else that you can track that you can become obsessive with. And I've even noticed it myself, and I know you probably have too, like, even if you don't like literally give two shits about it, as soon as you're like, oh, I have this number I gotta hit, then you're like, oh, well, where am I today? Oh, well, I gotta go. So it's not that we set numbers to where we're like, hey, like, we really want you like crushing it. But it's like, if somebody comes to me and says like, hey, like, I'm getting like 4,000 steps a day. And I'm like, all right, well, just for your like mental health and also just like moving around and digestion and everything and recovery, it's probably going to help to hit more. So I will have step thresholds for certain people, based on like if their job, like say they drive a lot, or, they just have like a very sedentary job where they like have to drive to work and then sit a lot at work. So it's like, hey, like, let's try to like break this up throughout the day. The quarantine has been interesting because a lot of people, and understandably so, first there's been people who haven't had like, a real gym access. So they might have gotten a few things, but they have very limited equipment, like, based on what they were having at the gym. So, they're having modified lesser workouts. So, they want to go on walks and do things. And I'm all for that. You know what I mean? So if people are getting more NEAT right now, because they want to go on some walks, like that's okay. You know what I mean? And I'm not going to say like, no, don't do that. Like, I don't want you to hit too many steps. I'm encouraging people to like, hey, if you want to go outside and do stuff, but there is a huge difference of when it's like, hey, like I want to go out and do this versus like, oh, I have to hit these step numbers. And then you wake up and you have this like impending doom of like, I have to get up and like be super, super active. So like anything else, it can be taken to an extreme when you are tracking something like that. So again, general recommendations. And I don't even track really much anymore. And I want to hear how you do it, because I know you said something earlier that was really interesting. So for me, like I pretty much know around like if I'm working on my computer all day, which is most days, and then like what do I need to do in order to hit like a step threshold that I feel comfortable with? Okay, I need to go on like 2 10-minute walks, or like a longer 20-minute walk, and then I need to like walk around the gym that I'm training at, and then do some stuff around the house, and that's it. It's not anything that I think more about in the day than that. And then, if I'm really, really trashed, maybe I move a little bit less. And then some days it's like, no, I got to clean the house. So that's going to be a lot of steps, right? Or, or activity, not steps, but activity. So it's just going to depend on the day. So, kind of moderate and see your personality, like how this fits for you. And I know you do it a little bit different, Lauren. So.
Yeah. So I have a harder time gauging how much I've moved throughout the day. Like there are days where I think that I've moved a shit ton, and I look down and it's like 6,000 steps, which nothing wrong with that, but like I don't gauge it well just if I don't look. So I use my watch for steps. But what I was telling Lauren before the podcast started was that because I have an Apple Watch and I get sent like emails, texts, phone calls, whatever, all to my watch, as well as it having my steps, it just, you can never detach, and I don't like that feeling. So for me, something that I've been doing is making sure that I'm getting my 10,000 steps as early as I can throughout the day, not in like an obsessive way. I'm not like power walking around my complex, like with weights on my wrists and my ankles. Like I got to get it before noon. No, but like I am aware of it. And the earlier that I can get it all in, the better, because then I am like, all right, I'm good. I moved how I wanted to. I'm going to take my watch off now. So then I can detach from that piece of technology. I don't have any sort of obsessive nature over that number because I know I hit my baseline goal. So whatever comes next throughout the day, it is what it is. And that's something that I would recommend to clients as well, because as we talk about a million times, is the importance of being able to put yourself in a parasympathetic state and always being attached to technology. Even when you're out for your walk, that's supposed to be your mental clarity. If you're on your phone the whole time, it doesn't count. So if you want to like listen to a podcast or whatever and get some knowledge bombs, fine. But like if you're scrolling and like doing whatever, it's not the point of it. So I really like to try to get out, get my steps, and then take my watch off and just kind of like detach for the rest of the day. So that's been helpful for me, because I think it's really important to reiterate what Lauren said, is it's the same thing that we tell our clients that are more kind of behavioral based. It's like some days you might eat more carbs, some days you might eat a little less carb. It will even out. It's the same thing with steps. Some days you're going to be moving a lot, and then some days you're not going to move as much, but it will even out. We just don't want it to be like sloth mode all the time, and we don't want it to be like NASCAR driver all the time. It's the same. Do you see our trend?
Yeah.
Moderation, people. So that's kind of like, that's kind of what I do. And also to Lauren's point, I know I had kind of started saying that a lot of times in quarantine, people are not having as much access, but and their steps are a little lower, their movement's a little less, but I have had clients as well that, you know, are getting above their prescribed cardio just with the NEAT and the extra walks for sanity. Totally fine. But as she said, I am looking out for red flags of that becoming like, oh, and then I ran at 800 and then I did, it's like, okay, we're going to tone it back.
It's you know, it's all circumstantial, and obviously when people are able to get back in a gym and train, it's going to be a little bit different. But right now it's like, hey, if you don't have a lot, like, go for a walk, and we're totally fine with that. And last thing, just to kind of round it out, and, you know, we're saying these, you know, these step thresholds or, you know, targets or whatever. How do you even track that? So, you know, Lauren mentioned that there is the Apple Watch. I have a Fitbit. The phone does have a tracker. You know, unless your phone's on you 24/7, which I know a lot of us have our phone on us, but like it really has to be on you the whole time, you know, which most people don't. I mean, if you're a guy and you have it like in your pocket, but like most chicks don't have that, you know, or at least me, like I'll leave my phone somewhere and then I'll like go do stuff and I'll come back, and, you know, so that's not necessarily the most accurate unless it's always on you. So a Fitbit or an Apple Watch or any kind of like, you know, tracker in that sense is going to be better. But again, they're never perfect, right? Because so say you go on a really hard bike session, right? I've been using my spin bike for some cardio lately, right? And, you know, there's no steps that come from that, right? So I might have had a really hard 10, 15, 20-minute bike session, and it looks like I didn't do anything. Now, I know the Apple Watch is a little bit more sophisticated, and you can say like, hey, I'm doing this or whatever, but I still don't even know if that adds into steps. Like, I think it just tells you like you trained. So versus if I went on a 20-minute walk, that would have picked it up, but it would have been a lot different metabolically, and, you know, right. So you can't, that's where it can become an issue. Like people like, and like we said in the beginning, like sometimes when you have those targets, you're like, oh man, well, I gotta get my steps in. So you start like moving your arms around and you start like, you know, making sure that you're doing stuff to hit it higher. Or like, oh, I'm going to clean with this arm only because the other arm doesn't pick up the steps. And realistically, like it doesn't matter. Right. But that's why I like, hey, sometimes use it as a gauge, you know, to, hey, wear it for a few days, kind of see where you're at, like check in with your activity levels. And then you kind of know, hey, I need to do roughly about this. You know, and then for example, too, like with jujitsu, like if I'm there for however many, you know, hours, first of all, I'm not wearing a Fitbit, obviously. That would be painful. Just like, bam, maybe I should do that. Just like,
this is literally such an unfair advantage.
hey, I don't have a lot of advantages, so I'm going to use whatever I can get.
Can.
Let's be honest. I'm just smacking people with my Fitbit. But even if I was wearing that, right, like a lot of times it wouldn't even pick that up, right? But it's like, was that all for nothing? Was I doing no activity? Of course not, you know? So it is a tool. It's the same way that it tracks your sleep, right? Which that could probably be a whole nother podcast. But you know, a lot of it.
Or your calories.
I'll just say this for now. The advances in sleep science and sleep measurements are not at a point yet where a ring or an app can tell you what stages of sleep that you're in. Now, can it do a decent job estimating based on your movement? Yes, that's what it is based off of, is your movement and your body temp and all of these kinds of things. I think that's why Oura Ring is, people say it's a little bit better. Is because I'm pretty sure it incorporates body temp. I could totally be wrong, but I think it does, and like heart rate and all that. So of course there's basically, they've made like regression models to show like, okay, this is as close as we can get. But the only true way to have an accurate, you know, sleep done is getting a sleep study done, which is very expensive, and most insurance companies do not cover that. Most doctors won't prescribe it because most people aren't just like interested in this, right? But so it can be, again, a tool, because you can say, hey, you know, most nights a week I got X amount, and then one night I got X amount. So where was the difference here? But when people try and like say, oh, you know, I had this much of the sleep, and it's like, there's just an estimate, like they're estimating. So you can still look at that and see I'm fine with people using it as like a trend marker, but it's still not like hard data. And the trackers just aren't there yet. And that's fine. You know what I mean? Like, it's a really hard technology to develop, especially for something that like you wear on your wrist versus like a whole laboratory of electrodes all over your body. So just as like, I'm not saying that don't use them, don't use like Fitbit, Whoop, Oura, whatever. I still think that it's pretty good, especially if you're interested in that, but it's not the end all be all. Just like if a Fitbit or an Apple Watch is pretty good about picking up your steps, it doesn't get everything. So it's just kind of like, you have to understand that and not be so obsessed with those numbers and say like, hey, here are these numbers, here's this data, and I'm going to detach from it and then just look at it that way. So as long as you can do that, we're fine with people tracking like all of this stuff. We think it's cool also. But you know, it's also not necessary. So especially if it's going to turn into some kind of an issue. So anything else?
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, kind of like to summarize with all of this stuff, like just know yourself. And if having more numbers, you know, is going to be an issue for you, just stay away from it, because you can certainly track these things in other ways. Like Lauren said, like, okay, if I go for a 30-minute walk, I'm going to be around 3,000, 4,000 steps. Okay, cool. I do that twice. I'm at 6,000, 7,000. And then my movement throughout the day will probably take care of it. So like, there's other things that you can do if you don't want to be attached to another number. And yeah, just not taking it for verbatim. Like, it is a guide, and it is kind of like a maybe kind of thing. Like, you're around this much, but it's not something that needs to be taken so seriously that like, if you don't get your 10,000 steps, you can't go hang out with somebody because you have to go somewhere to walk. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, and that we have seen that. So
yes. It's not like an exaggeration.
Yeah.
Those are real things that happen. And of course that's very extreme. Yeah. But just like anything, you know, I think that understanding NEAT is so important for not only fat loss, but just like, you know, just being a healthy individual in general, recovery, digestion. There's so many different benefits to, you know, moving, but it's also important to, you know, hey, okay, I'm going to use this kind of stuff as a guide, and then I'm going to move forward. And, you know, some people, they're fine and they just really, really want to know those numbers, and that's totally cool too. But it's just like, hey, we have to like detach from it. And it's not something that has to be like exactly the perfect every day. But it's also a really good tool as a coach to use, like, and be like, hey, you know, like, fat loss isn't moving right now. I need you to hit, you know, here's your cardio targets, but I need you to also hit these, you know, steps per day. So we know that at least this is consistent, because I don't want somebody hitting, you know, 6,000 one day and then 15 the next. And then, you know, right. I want it to be generally pretty consistent.
Yeah.
So yeah, thank you guys for tuning in as always. If you have any other questions, please let us know. And if you have not already subscribed and left a review and done all that, 10 stars, we'd really, really appreciate it. And for any other information on articles, podcasts, programs, or applying for coaching, you can visit teamlocofit.com and everything will be on there.